Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Blue Marble Science. You want to hear the worst explanation of how airplanes fly? Ever? Well, Brian's logic has it for you. Hey, warning, severe facial and monitor damage alert is in effect. Get out those oven mitts. I'm not kidding. Push the monitors way back out of punching range. And let's light this dumpster fire and have some fun.
Well, how are you doing? This video is going to be about aircraft pitch. I have made videos on this in the past to do with the chord line and angle of attack. This is going to be a slightly more fuller version with some extras in it, and there will be a good bit of reading, but also some diagrams in between. And I know that this will inform a lot of people. Okay, let's get stuck into it. So we don't have too long of a video. Okay, aircraft pitch. The pitch of an aircraft, also known as its angle of attack, is determined by its airspeed.
Brian, you're one sentence into your presentation and you've already got this screwed up. Angle of attack and pitch angle are not the same things. Here's a publication from a little company in the U.S. Maybe you've heard of them. Their name is Boeing. They build airplanes. Let's look at these first two paragraphs here. Angle of attack is the angle between the oncoming air or the relative wind and a reference line on the airplane or wing. Relative wind is just pilot speak for the direction the airplane is traveling. There's the angle of attack, and it's irrespective of the pitch angle. The angle of attack of the wing, along with the airspeed, is going to determine how much lift the wing is producing. Now look at the second paragraph. Angle of attack is sometimes confused with pitch angle or flight path angle. Pitch angle, which is attitude, is the angle between the longitudinal axis where the airplane is pointed and the horizon. This angle is displayed on the attitude indicator or artificial horizon. There's the pitch angle. Brian, what in the name of Zeus's butthole made you think those two things were the same?
What I mean by this is that the airspeed of an airplane will determine the correct pitch to hold that airplane at. So any reasonable change in airspeed will result in a change in pitch. Explanation. An airplane at takeoff creates lift due to two things. The first is thrust, which causes a downforce on the tail of the aircraft, and the second is manipulation of the elevators at the tail, adding to this downforce being created by the thrust.
You got a lot wrong in a couple of sentences there, Brian. Airspeed does not control pitch. You've got this exactly backwards. Pitch actually controls airspeed. There's a relationship between pitch and power that we'll get into, but airspeed is not controlling anything. We're controlling the airspeed. And this was unbelievable. Brian, thrust does not cause lift. The wing does that based on the angle of attack and some other factors we'll talk about. Airflow over the control surfaces at the tail of the plane and their position is what generates a downforce on the tail of the airplane. It's not thrust, Brian. Thrust has nothing to do with that. I really don't think you should be talking about this stuff.
This results in a change of pressure just above and below the leading edge of the wings, with positive pressure being created just under the first quarter of the leading edge of the airfoil's wings. This positive pressure pushes the leading edge of the wings upwards, as this positive pressure is trying to equalize with the negative pressure above it. As the positive pressure is high pressure and the negative pressure is low pressure, and as we know, high pressure will always flow to low pressure. This is what creates the lift effect in an aircraft, as the leading edge of the wings are being tilted upwards, pitched up. This is officially described as the chord line of the wings being pitched above horizontal.
Brian's description of lift is wrong. It's not high pressure trying to go to low pressure. Brian's learned just enough physics to be dangerous. Lift is caused by the redirection of airflow. Airflow on the underside of the wing is being pushed down. That results in an opposite force pushing the wing up. Likewise, airflow across the top of the wing is pulling air down, and again the opposite force is a force pushing the wing up. Now this is true as long as the airflow on top of the wing remains attached to the wing. If we exceed the critical angle of attack of the wing, that airflow across the top of the wing will separate and we'll lose lift from the top surface. That's what we call a stall.
The chord line is an imaginary line that runs through the center of the wings and is used as a benchmark for the aircraft's pitch-lift relationship. When the chord line is pitched above horizontal, this is described as positive lift.
Brian's going to get this wrong all the way through his video. A wing produces lift when the wing presents a positive angle of attack, and angle of attack is the angle between the chord line of the wing and the relative wind. That's the direction the airplane is traveling in, not the horizontal. So every time you hear Brian say horizontal, just know that what he's really trying to say is relative wind.
When it is pitched below horizontal, this is described as negative lift as a basic. Some wings act differently than others though, as a cambered wing will still hold more positive than negative lift when it is pitched 2 degrees below horizontal. But
Brian spends a good bit of time talking about a cambered wing's ability to maintain lift at low angles of attack, and of course he still has relative wind and horizontal confused. But the fact is that has absolutely nothing to do with an airplane's ability to fly over a curved earth. Let's skip forward a little bit, shall we?
as any pitch, regardless of how small, that is below horizontal is officially considered a descent.
Well, now there's something I never heard air traffic control say. Critter 1722, Indy Center, officially descend and maintain flight level 230. Nope, never heard that one.
So could a cambered wing help a pilot have a more controlled descent? Yes, of course it could, but I am sure it is a very I am sure it's a very popular wing for descending with.
Having trouble getting that pesky wing to descend properly? The addition of just a few strategically placed Riley Mark II descend-o-matics will have that misbehaving airfoil falling out of the sky faster than bird can hit a windshield.
Other types of airfoils, wings, will lose all positive lift once the chord line reaches 0 degrees horizontal and below, as they cannot hold positive lift unless they are pitched up above the horizontal. As an aircraft flies, the more thrust that is imparted by the pilot will result in more downforce on the tail, which will create more positive lift, but due to the positive pressure being mainly under the front quarter of the leading edge of the wings, this will cause an upward tilting of the wings and the nose of the aircraft. So as a pilot has thrust, they must also control the pitch. This is why when a jet fighter flies fast, they keep the nose pitched at about +2 degrees above horizontal. And when they are coming into land, they will have maybe a +10 degrees pitch angle above horizontal. This is also the reason why commercial aircraft fly with a pitch angle of between +3 and +5 degrees above horizontal when flying at cruising altitude. As the faster a plane flies, the more positive lift it gains, and the slower a plane flies, the less positive lift it gains. And that is the reason for a +2 degree pitch when flying fast and a +10 degree pitch when flying slow to land. The pilot must change and control the pitch angle in accordance with the airspeed. So when flying fast, the airplane must have its nose pushed down to stop the positive lift from creating an upward stall due to too great of a pitch angle upwards. And when flying slow, the pilot must keep a high pitch angle as there is less thrust being imparted, so raising the pitch angle will create positive lift and keep the airplane in the air.
Increasing the pitch angle will keep the airplane in the air? Brian, that's one of the better ways I can think of to bring the airplane out of the air very quickly. Let me explain. Number one, there's no such thing as an upward stall. There's no sideways stalls, no downward stalls, just a stall. Every wing has a critical angle of attack. An angle of attack is the angle between the chord line of the wing and the direction the airplane is traveling in. When that angle reaches the critical angle of attack, airflow separates from the upper surface of the wing. That's what a stall is. And when that happens, the wing loses lift and usually the airplane puts its nose down, sometimes pretty violently. This is something that happens to pilots when they're on a landing approach. You're already slow and you already have a high angle of attack. If you're descending too rapidly, the last thing you want to do is pull back on the yoke and slow the plane down even more. That's how you stall the airplane. We control the rate of descent by adding some power, not by increasing the angle of attack. You know, I think it's time we introduce Brian to the lift formula. Well, there it is, Brian. This formula relates lift to what we call the coefficient of lift, the density of the air the wing is flying in, the speed of the air, and the surface area of the wing itself. Notice that lift is proportional to the coefficient of lift, but lift is proportional to the square of the airspeed. That means if I double the coefficient of lift, I'll double the lift. But if I double the airspeed, I will get 4 times as much lift. There's another factor in here that I want you to pay attention to, though, and that's air density. Lift is directly proportional to the density of the air the airplane is flying in. This is why an airplane will maintain its altitude with little or no input from the pilot once it's been trimmed properly. And it's exactly the same reason why an airplane can fly over the curved surface of the earth without the pilot having to do anything. We can see all of that graphically. Here's a chart that displays coefficient of lift, coefficient of drag, and the lift to drag ratio. We're not interested in lift to drag or coefficient of drag. We're interested in the coefficient of lift. Now that coefficient is displayed on the right-hand side in that red bar. Across the bottom, you see the angle of attack. The red line is the coefficient of lift, and there's a point that's identified as stall. That's the critical angle of attack. Looks like about 20 degrees. It coincides with the maximum coefficient of lift. So let's pick a point that would be fairly comfortable for takeoff in a light airplane. Let's say an angle of attack of about 12.5 degrees. That corresponds to a coefficient of lift of 1.0. Now let's go to cruise speed. We'd like to have an angle of attack of about, let's say, 4 degrees. About a third the angle of attack we needed at takeoff. That brings our coefficient of lift down to about 0.3. Well, I think our airplane's going to be pretty happy with this. Let's see. At takeoff, we had an angle of attack of 12.5 degrees. Coefficient of lift is therefore 1.0. We want to take off at an airspeed of about 30.5 meters per second. And that yields a lift of 908 kilograms. Now notice I've got the air density set for 1.22 kilograms per cubic meter, more or less what it would be at sea level. Let's see what happens at altitude. We've reduced our angle of attack to 4 degrees. The coefficient of lift, as we just saw, drops down to 0.3. But our airspeed up at cruise is 64 meters per second, a little more than double what we had at takeoff. And our lift is almost exactly the same, 907 kilograms. Notice again the air density now is down to 0.905. That would be a density equivalent to about 10,000 feet. So this is how it works in the real world. But again, pay attention to air density. That is, in fact, what allows the airplane to follow the curvature of the earth. Now let's talk about aerodynamics a little bit and the forces that act on an airplane. The first force we have is lift. That's being generated by the wing, and that's counteracting the weight of the plane. We have thrust that is being provided by the engine, and that's counteracting the drag on the airplane. Drag's made up of a couple of components. Induced drag is the price we pay for lift, and we've got parasitic drag, which is drag created by air flowing over the surfaces of the plane. But what we can say is this: in level unaccelerated flight, lift is equal to weight and thrust is equal to drag. We've talked about angle of attack and how important it is to control that. So let's see how we do it. Here's a little airplane again. You see the relative wind, and it's not really wind at all, but it appears to be wind to the airplane because the airplane is flying in that direction. Now the angle of attack, again, is the angle between the chord line of the wing and the relative wind. Now let's have a look down here. We see the center of gravity, and you think about that like it's the balance point of the airplane. But the center of lift is behind the center of gravity. And gravity, of course, is always doing what gravity does. It's acting straight down. So because the balance point, the center of gravity, is in front of the center of lift, the airplane would naturally want to fly in an attitude like that. Well, that's not good. We need to be able to push the tail of the plane down. Now, a lot of people think the job of the tail of the plane is to hold the tail up, but it really isn't. What the tail is actually doing is pushing the rear of the airplane down and holding the nose up. Now, the horizontal tail is called the horizontal stabilizer, but on the back of the horizontal stabilizer, we have an elevator with a trim tab, and the elevator and trim tab are connected to controls in the cockpit. When the pilot pushes forward on the control yoke, the elevator will deflect downward like that, and that actually pushes the tail up. But when the pilot pulls back on the control yoke, the elevator deflects up like that, and that produces a downforce on the tail. That's what we're looking for. The trim tab is just a device that allows the pilot to remove the pressure that he's having to hold on the control yoke. This is the tail of a Cessna 172. You can see the horizontal stabilizer here, and this is the elevator. The elevator is connected to the control yoke, and when the pilot pushes the control yoke forward, the elevator deflects downward like you see it now, and when you pull back on the yoke, the elevator deflects upward, and that'll cause the plane to climb. This is the trim tab. Now let's take a look at climbs and descents and the forces that act on an airplane. We've already gone over this. The little airplane in the center there is just in straight level flight. Lift is equal to weight, thrust is equal to drag. That's simple enough. Now let's make the airplane climb. I'm going to keep the airspeed the same. I'm going to do that because I'm not going to change the angle of attack. Let's let the plane climb at an angle about like that. Now this is highly exaggerated just for illustration purposes. But here's what happens. Weight still acts straight down, but lift acts perpendicular to that flight path. To get the plane to climb, we've increased the thrust. That gives us a resultant vector R1 that looks like that. But we need a vector R2 opposing R1 for the forces to be in equilibrium. Well, we've got drag, but drag didn't change because the airspeed hasn't changed. And drag alone won't give us the resultant vector we're looking for. Fortunately, gravity is helping us out, and we have a rearward component of weight. The weight of the airplane acts just like drag does. Now we have an opposing R2 vector, and the airplane is in a steady climb. All the forces are in equilibrium. Now let's see what happens in a descent. Now I'm not just going to reduce the thrust, I'm going to take it away completely. We're going to be flying a glider. We're going to let our flight path look like that. Again, weight is acting straight down, lift is acting perpendicular to our direction of travel, and drag is unchanged because again, we didn't change our airspeed. We still have the same angle of attack. So that gives us resultant vector R1, which is opposing weight. All we need to know is where the thrust is coming from. Again, gravity is helping us out. This time, we have a forward component of weight. That forward component of weight gives us vector R2, which is opposing the lift vector. Let's exaggerate this just a little bit more for one final point. When we started, we had nothing but the forward component of weight, and it was exactly equal to drag. What happens if we add some thrust? Well, now the combination of thrust and forward component of weight still have to be equal to drag. So the forward component of weight has to be reduced, and we do that by changing our angle of descent. And if we add enough thrust, we come right back to our level flight condition, where thrust is equal to drag. Now there's a lot more to it than this. Brian wants to make it sound like you can figure it out in just a few minutes by reading Wiki. I don't think so. But at least maybe I've given you a little better feel for what's going on. One thing that Brian has constantly said is that a commercial airliner has to put its nose below horizontal to descend. Let's see if we can put an end to that rumor. Let's let our friend Brian be the pilot on this shiny new 767 here. Just take your seat, ma'am. We'll be at the scene of the crash very shortly. The airplane's flying at 550 miles an hour. That's 48,400 feet per minute. If we descend at 2,000 feet per minute, we can lose 30,000 feet of altitude in about 15 minutes. The arctangent of 2,000 feet per minute divided by 48,400 feet per minute is 2.36 degrees. 2.36 degrees, Brian. If we were cruising at an angle of attack of 3 degrees and we pitched the nose down 2.36 degrees for descent, how did the nose go below horizontal? Just a question for you to ponder. I think we'll let that do it for this one. Brian's got about another 20 minutes of derp, and in part 2, we'll look at his contention that an airplane can't possibly fly over a globe. Oh boy, that's going to be fun. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit those little buttons down there. Tickle the little bell if you want notifications. Shout out to the members and the patrons and PayPals. Thanks for what you guys do. And I will see you in part 2.